Okay, so let's officially start our September 2024 Repro Action Team meeting for the St. Petersburg League of Women Voters. As you all just heard me say, we've got a storm on the way. Hop whenever you need to tonight. Safety's first. If you're doing things in the background, that's fine too. We do have a couple of announcements that I want to get through at the beginning. So if you do need to jump, you get these now. I think this is the most important. This is what our team is working on. So I'm just going to share my screen here. I got a little PowerPoint for you. There's not a whole lot, but it's important stuff. It's all the stuff we're trying to get people to and the stuff that's going to make the real difference on getting Amendment 4 passed. Zoom did an update. Did anyone notice that? iOS did an update, and apparently so did Zoom. Amy, do you know?
While you're pulling that up, Lindsay, can I ask a question really quick?
I hope you would.
This is Stacy. Did that hearing occur today or no? Because the Leon County clerk was closed, courthouse was closed. Do you know the ACA hearing?
I don't know the answer to that, but my guess would be no, it did not. If they closed it, I don't see how it could have gone forward. That typically applies even for like remote hearings. It would
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that'd be my guess. Does anyone on the call know where the tool to share screens moved to?
I can share it, Lindsay, if you want, and you just prompt me to hit advance.
There's a green button with an arrow that says share, but if your screen isn't wide enough, it'll disappear.
I think you're right. That's what it is. 1 second. Let me move. That is it. Okay. Thank you. See, I thought I was smarter than that, and sometimes I'm not. Okay, can everyone see that?
Not yet.
Oh, can I not move it over to that screen? I think that might be the thing. Now you can?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've got a few fun events coming up, and I think this is the most important. And I want to say that right at the beginning, because I don't know if it's always clear that this really is the most effective way for us to reach voters. These one-on-one conversations at somebody's door, getting to talk, to answer their questions, to talk through kind of the key points of what this means, and just informing them that this is on the ballot. This really, really, really is the way to get across to our voters. So if you haven't done a canvas before, I'm encouraging you to scan one of these QR codes now, sign up to get out here, of course, after the hurricane. These are all, hopefully coming up post. The 28th will be pending weather, obviously, but these things they're so important, and so many people don't even know that this is on the ballot this year. It will quite literally make or break whether they get out there and even vote. This is one of those issues that will get people out into the field. So if you haven't done it, please sign up. And if you haven't done this before, Amy Weintraub, who's also on the call here and is a former Repro chair, it has just been such an incredible force in getting people out into the field and canvassing. So I just wanted to give her a couple of seconds here to talk about her experience and the importance of getting out to canvass.
Absolutely. Folks, I have been canvassing my whole adult life for politicians and causes, and I can tell you that this is the most rewarding canvassing experience I've ever had. The targeted households are awesome. They are people who are with us as far as believing in reproductive freedom, but they're not, I guess you would say, loyal voters. They don't vote every time. And the social pressure that we apply just by chatting with them for 30 seconds about Amendment 4, it can be all it takes to get them to commit to actually following through this time. And so it is important work. It's friendly. I even hear new canvassers talking about it like it's fun. They say, that was so fun, because there's a lot of affinity for what we're trying to do. And so, don't be afraid of it. It's good stuff. It's fun. It's interesting. And the fact is, we need you. I just was looking today at some statistics. As Lindsay said, door-to-door canvassing, aside from talking to people you already know, door-to-door canvassing is the number one thing that changes voter behavior. Far outweighs things like phone banking, text banking, postcarding. This is the most effective way you can spend your time. And we're doing a bang up job. I know the next slide Lindsay's going to show will show you how well we did just last week. Look at that. We are number one in the state. Our county is number one in the state, and that is because of the St. Pete League of Women Voters for how many doors we knocked last week. And you can see that Miami-Dade County came in second, and we doubled what they did. We are so far and away the busiest county. And again, that's by and large because the league is so committed. You are so committed. Let's keep the momentum going.
I hope that energized everyone. If it didn't, then I don't know what else to do. We're already number one here, but I think that we could probably, I think we should shoot for doing like 3 times what Miami's doing, and that it would just be hilarious because they're so much bigger than us. But we're that impressive. We're small and mighty. And so with that, we've got a couple of other things coming up. I think everyone's seen them in the bursts that are going out. We've got a really fun family day with support for Yes on 4 at Cage Brewing. That's going to be a family-friendly thing with our parent group. Our parent group has been so active in this cause, especially. So I want, if you know someone in that parent group, I don't think we have many of them here tonight because, you know, they're feeding their kids or putting them down or taking them to whatever they have to do to get away from this hurricane. So you know, give them a pat on the back, say thanks for doing this, even though you're so busy right now. It means so much when they go out and they bring their kids and they've got their babies in strollers. It really sends a message. So go out and support them. They're going to be out there tabling. You can join them at that table. They've got limited volunteer slots, but they'll be doing crowd canvassing, which is similar to door-to-door canvassing, except it'll be people, you know, it'll be a larger group coming into the brewery. It obviously won't be targeted doors. It's just going to be whoever's coming in and stops by and wants to chat and learn more. So we've got that coming up, and we also have our all-member general meeting coming up on October 1st. That'll be a tour of the supervisor of elections, which we've never been invited to do before. They have never said come in and get a tour. So this is a big deal. This is only our members that get to come do this. I highly recommend, if you're available on that evening, that you attend. It's your chance to ask questions to our supervisor of elections and learn more about some of the ins and outs of the process and how things get on ballots, and how we check registration and how ballots get cleaned up if they might be, you know, if they get thrown out and whatever it is. We also have the film coming up. It's far out at this point. It's October 27th, but you can get tickets online. You can buy them right from Greenlight Cinema. It's a local art theater. This is touring. It's a comedy. A Daily Show producer, Liz Winstead, put this together, and it's a really interesting tour over the last 1.5 to 2 years of her nonprofit, as it's a nonprofit troupe actually of comedians and a whole group of fun people, and we'll get to watch that in AC and hopefully go out on canvas beforehand. So that's all of that, and with that, I would like to introduce our panelists this evening and give you a little bit of background on who they are and the suit that they've been part of in Missouri here. So we have a very special panel assembled. They're going to discuss the connection between reproductive freedom and church-state separation. They'll highlight their case challenging Missouri's abortion ban under the state's Establishment Clause, and also discuss how the rise of Christian nationalism is a threat to both abortion rights and religious freedom. So we have Mix Campbell, a senior litigation counsel at the National Women's Law Center. They focus on protecting the right to contraception and the intersection of reproductive rights in the First Amendment. Prior to joining the National Women's Law Center, they worked at the ACLU of Arizona and Marijuana Policy Project as a lobbyist and litigator, and as a criminal defense attorney. Jenny Samuels is a legal fellow at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Prior to her fellowship, Jenny clerked for a federal district court judge in Maine. She attended Harvard Law School, where she was an editor on the Harvard Law Review and president of the Alliance for Reproductive Justice. We also have Reverend Jan Barnes, who is one of 4 United Church of Christ clergy, retired now from pastoral ministry and from hospital chaplain services. She's one of 4 of the United Church of Christ clergy plaintiffs in this litigation, and of 13 faith leaders challenging Missouri's abortion ban. So with that, I think I'll hand it over. KM, would you like to give us some background on the case and separation of church and state?
Sure. I have to say my disclaimer at the beginning. The National Women's Law Center is a C3 organization, so we do public education and litigation, not politics. But also, the things I'm going to say tonight are my personal opinions, and not necessarily those of the National Women's Law Center. So with that, disclaimer out of the way, I think I'll give a little bit of background on sort of the rise of Christian nationalism, and then I think I'll turn it over to Jenny to say a little more specifically about our case in Missouri. Our country was, of course, founded on the separation of church and state. And actually, if you go down to Annapolis, Maryland, which is the only state capital that also used to be the capital of the United States, and is where George Washington resigned his commission. There is like literally physically a traffic circle that is called Church Circle, with the church in it. And then where the Capitol building is a separate traffic circle that is called State Circle. So there is a physical representation from the very beginning of this country of the separation of church and state. That said, I generally do not agree with the originalist interpretation of the Constitution, given that the founding fathers were slaveholders, and women, of course, did not have the right to vote at the time of the founding. So I think the idea that we should interpret the Constitution only with regard to the viewpoint of those white men is not a good interpretive method for constitutional law, although unfortunately it is the one that the majority of our current Supreme Court subscribes to. So talking a little bit about the rise of Christian nationalism, there is a worldview that there's no such thing as transgender people, that women should not be able to control their own reproduction, and that the only valid form of reproduction is in a heterosexual marriage, as well as a increasing attempt to impose that worldview and those religious beliefs on everyone in this country. And this has been a very long-term strategy in the law, with think tanks, very deliberate efforts to indoctrinate college and particularly law students, and a slow takeover of federal courts as more and more judges and justices have been appointed that subscribe to this worldview. And unfortunately, I think the folks that support civil rights have not, in general, been paying enough attention to the court system, to that particular, the third branch of our government. This worldview also includes this idea that any affirmative action or attempts to help minority individuals, that the accurate teaching of the history of this country, or that the refusal to let people with their worldview disregard the laws, that all of these things are the real discrimination. And we're seeing that play out in a lot of cases. I'm sure many of you have heard a lot on the news about Project 2025, which is a blueprint that the conservative legal movement has put forth of what they would like to see in an incoming presidential administration. And it really spells out this worldview and actually has a number of specific strategies. And the thing is about 900 pages long. A number of organizations have done a good job of summarizing some of the dangers and the material in there. So you do not need to read 900 pages. Democracy Forward, I'll shout out. One of Jenny and my former colleagues is there, and they've done a lot of work about sort of summarizing what's in there. So I'm just going to touch on a few things that relate to reproductive rights specifically. One of those is increasingly conflating abortion and contraception. The folks who are opposed to any sort of reproductive rights have said that not only emergency contraception, but now even hormonal birth control, they are trying to say is equivalent to abortion. Whether you support abortion rights or not, that's just like scientifically inaccurate. And it's very dangerous because of there's so many abortion restrictions in place. And that is going to make that situation even worse by denying people access to contraception. Another thing that they are doing is they are using a federal law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was intended to make sure that the government wasn't taking away people's religious freedoms, but it is now being weaponized to allow individuals who want to discriminate against people to carve out huge exceptions in our basic civil rights protections and our anti-discrimination laws in the name of their religious beliefs. This has been particularly acute in the LGBTQIA plus context, but we are seeing it more and more with respect to reproductive rights as well. To give just one example, there is an employer who got a court ruling in, of course, Texas, that basically says that employer does not have to respect the basic rights of their LGBTQIA plus employees because non-discrimination violates their religious beliefs. So this is pretty scary. And, we're very concerned that could get even worse if the courts start treating these rules that were formulated under this law as if they're like constitutional requirements. That thankfully hasn't happened yet. It's still statutory. But this is, a scary developments. And one final thing I wanted to bring up from Project 2025 is the idea of eliminating sex education and or using sex ed in schools to spread misinformation, like contraception isn't effective. It's the abstinence only stuff from the Bush administration all over again. Oops, excuse me. They cleverly changed the name from abstinence only to sexual risk avoidance, but it's the same misinformation about contraception. It's the same pushing of religious beliefs about abstinence and stereotypes um, about men and women and shaming of people rather than providing accurate information that we saw for years already. And this is really part of sort of a larger attack on public education. Um, y'all are in Florida, so I'm probably not saying anything you're not already aware of, but there's been an increasing attempt um, to essentially ban te teachers from teaching accurate history, with the idea that, for example, talking about slavery and civil rights will upset white students, and so we can't allow that. The Don't Say Gay law in Florida, that is making teachers afraid to like even be LGBTQIA plus individuals in the classroom. feeling like they can't sponsor GSAs for their students, all of these things. Yeah, and I see in the chat, yeah, schools in Florida are in many cases afraid to teach sex ed at all. If you look at there's a think tank called the Manhattan Institute that sort of provides the intellectual foundation for this parents' rights movement that is behind a lot of these attacks on public education. And at one point in their materials, they literally say, we have to attack the public schools because not every parent will be able to homeschool their kids, and kids going to public schools makes them more likely to be Democrats. So that is part of the rationale that they are using for this. And so I think those are just kind of some basics of where things are going. And I guess I will pause there and turn it over to Jenny to say a little bit more about developments around Establishment Clause and why we brought our case in Missouri specifically.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cam. And I do echo Cam's disclaimer at the beginning that these views are my own. And thank you all for having us here. This is a really great opportunity to kind of talk about our case and think about the broader context that this is happening in. So KM began by talking about church-state separation. And I feel like it's helpful to kind of unpack why that is a principle that that I care about and why you should care about too. I think there's a common perception that church-state separation is an idea that religion needs to be out of the government and that it's kind of an anti-religion perspective. But actually, church-state separation is meant to protect religious freedom and protect people's ability to not have other religious belief systems foisted on them. And I think that's sometimes lost in the conversation around these issues. I think that Christian nationalists have, conveniently has been very successful in their effort to kind of write the Establishment Clause out of the conversation, and in doing that kind of demonize the Establishment Clause as being anti-religion, but in fact, it's very important for protecting religious freedom and for protecting our pluralist values in this country. And so that is what the Missouri lawsuit is all about. As some of you may know, Missouri has a very draconian abortion ban in place through a variety of different statutes have basically made abortion illegal and inaccessible in the state. And in enacting these various statutes that have banned abortion in the state, the legislators enacting the statutes were very explicit in their intention, and their intention was to enact their specific religious perspective about when life begins, and to force everyone else in the state and pregnant people in the state to conform to that one view, which is that life begins at conception. And they were very clear that that's not a scientific perspective, that is a religious point of view. And, if you were thinking maybe, they had some, secular basis for that, well, they made it very clear on the floor of, the state house and the state senate when they were debating that they were acting upon their religious prerogative to enact an abortion ban. And again, if that wasn't enough, they literally said in the text of the law that the purpose of the law was to ban abortion in the understanding that Almighty God created life and that life begins at conception. And so it was very clear, literally in the explicit text of the statute, that this was a religious law with a religious purpose. And again, not just, this isn't a multi-religious pluralist view, this is a one specific religious view. And Missouri's Constitution has very strong protections to prevent this kind of law from being enacted. The Missouri has 3 constitutional provisions that together act as the state's establishment clauses. And you might be aware of the federal establishment clause, which kind of, in some ways, or once maybe provided this guarantee of church-state separation. I would say that is no longer quite the case, unfortunately. But Missouri's establishment clauses provide those same protections, but even stronger. Missouri's establishment clauses have, the Missouri Constitution has been interpreted to provide even stronger guarantees of separation of church and state. And that's important because the federal establishment clause is, this Supreme Court has decided, is basically an afterthought of the founders, and therefore we should just ignore it. And the test that they've established to evaluate establishment clause claims is history and tradition. So was the type of activity understood by the founders to be a violation of the First Amendment? And as you can imagine, that's a very problematic legal standard for some of the reasons that KM touched on, which is that at the time of the founding, women, people of color, and many other, some religious minorities weren't in power. And so the views of the founders cannot be said to represent the views of everyone who we would now understand to be part of this nation and important in citizens. And so that's very problematic. So we brought this lawsuit in Missouri on behalf of plaintiffs like Jan, who's on this call today. And I'm very excited for Jan to be able to share her religious perspective with you on this issue. And our case is that Missouri's abortion ban violates the state's establishment clauses because it foists a specific religious perspective on Missourians, including Missourians like Jan, who does not share that religious perspective and has her own religious view on abortion and the religious ethics and morality of abortion as healthcare. And so that is our lawsuit. It's very straightforward, actually, because Missouri's establishment clauses are very straightforward, that you can't enact a law that explicitly enacts one religious perspective and foists that view on all Missourians. Unfortunately, a circuit court judge, which is kind of like the first level of court that we filed our case in this summer, dismissed our lawsuit, saying that no, Missouri's constitution doesn't provide stronger church-state separation protections. It's actually the same standard as the federal one. And so we have to look at the history and the tradition of how was abortion treated historically. And spoiler alert, abortion, for the hundreds of years in which only white property-owning men were in power, was not treated favorably. And so that was, and the judge did acknowledge, women and people of color were not able to vote or be in power at that time, and yet still said that we have to look at the history and tradition, and that is the standard. And so that decision is legally incorrect because Missouri does not use the history and tradition standard, but also it is, you don't have to be a lawyer to realize how ridiculous it is that the way that we evaluate claims in 2024 is to look at how people 300 years ago would have understood the issue, especially issues as complex and, of the moment as abortion. It makes no sense to look at what the founders thought about that. So we are appealing that case to the Supreme Court now, and we're hoping for a positive result, but it has, I think that this case fits in exactly with what everything KM has said about white Christian nationalists attempting to use their power to control bodies. And it's not about religious freedom, because if it was about religious freedom, they would understand that enacting a law that explicitly stamps and tramples on the religious views of others is not religious freedom. That is, a theocracy. And so it's very much a part of the same troubling pattern we've seen in a lot of other cases in a lot of other contexts. But yeah, that's where we're at now. And oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, so the case is currently on appeal to the Supreme Court of Missouri. And so because it was a constitutional case, we skip the intermediate court and go straight to the highest court in the state of Missouri. But while our appeal is pending, there is also a ballot initiative in the state of Missouri, where a group of Missourians is attempting to pass an initiative that would overturn essentially the state's abortion ban. And I think at this point we will like turn it over to Jan to talk about perhaps why she's participating in the case and anything else you want to share.
Sure, thank you. I'm a United Church of Christ pastor, and if you know anything about our denomination, you know that we are very progressive and rarely tell people what they must think and what they must do and how they must live. We have some suggestions, perhaps, of what we'd like, what seems to work, but we don't say that you have to do this or you don't have to do that. And when I read the language of 126, it kind of threw me back because it was clearly Christian language, all of it, no matter what quote they decided to bring forward, that, God is, in charge of all creation, or, that a child is alive and no matter what happens. And even though our Jewish brothers and sisters would say, no, that child is not alive until that first breath is taken. And we are responsible for the life of the mother until the baby is born, whatever that might entail. So the language was very clearly directed toward one religious group, and it was offensive to the 14 of us who said, this cannot be right. There's so many other people in Missouri who believe differently than those of us who might be standing in a Christian pulpit or sitting in the pew. They just don't think the same way, and it is not fair for us. It is not right for us to make a law that impacts their lives so unfairly and with such lack of equity. And I have worked on the issue of reproductive justice for a long, long time. When I was in seminary, my husband and I were people that stood out and ran with cars that pulled into the parking lots of the clinics and stood and helped people come out of their cars and get into the clinics while pro-choice, pro-life people were banging on their windows and telling them they were going to go to hell and that everything was horrible and they shouldn't be doing this. And we would walk people in and walk people out, and we'd started that way. And we've protested, we've held signs, and after I was ordained, became someone who counseled women who felt as if having an abortion was going to be the end. They would go to hell, that God would not love them anymore, that they couldn't exist had they made such a decision. And so we were able to talk with them and go, that is not the case. You are loved by God greater than this. And so what we have done as clergy, and it's been kind of a quiet, slow moving for us as litigants. We haven't been arguing it. We sat in the feels like pews in the courthouse and listened to arguments and decided, what the heck do you think they're saying? I don't have a clue what this is all about, but what I know is that we are in the right. And my denomination and most that I know of do not preach politics from our pulpit. We preach the gospel. And lo and behold, the gospel is so similar. The words of Jesus and the writers of scripture are so similar to what we would like to see happen. And but there are people now, white Christian nationalists, who do not see it that way at all. And they would like for us to be quiet and let them infiltrate all our congregations and do what J.D. Vance says they should do, which is we should not be preaching, we should have our children, we should stay home, we shouldn't be working, we don't need to go have an education. And I don't know how similar this sounds to you, but it sure sounds very similar to other religious perspectives around the world that we do not want to have here. And so I want this lawsuit to go forward and to be positive. The Blackman and the Tracy Blackman is Reverend Tracy Blackman. She's a UCC clergy person as well. And I would like to see, I would love to see her stand up and just hand it back to the Attorney General because no one could do it better. So if you ever get a chance to hear her, listen. I'm looking at, I have not, without my glasses, I can't see all the comments that you all have made. Everyone on this call can make a difference in this. Absolutely. Whatever your religious tradition or not, maybe the religious tradition or the faith life is not yours. That's all right too. That's not a problem. What's a problem is if you don't say something, if you don't vote, if you don't knock on somebody's door, that's the problem. So I would say, just like they said earlier, go knock on people's door, take a chance, and just say what it is that you believe. And you would be surprised at how many people are waiting to hear that.
Thank you,
So
Jan.
there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any of you, I've got one, I'm going to release this to questions from the audience in just a second here, but I have a question that I'm hoping any three of you can address, but I want to pass it to Jen first since you're off mute. How can we talk when we're knocking doors, when we're having these conversations with family members, with friends and strangers? How do we talk to people of faith and people not of faith about abortion when it feels like it might, especially when it feels like it might go against their faith? How do we talk to them about the importance of voting yes on for anyway?
Well, I think it has to do with what is the personal impact for them? If you're going to be there talking face to face, you need to know a little bit about their story. What is their faith tradition? And how they bring that to their everyday life? And what would it mean if their daughter or granddaughter had an abortion? What would you do? Would you stop loving that person? Would you put them out on the street? What are you going to do? And so I think you have to just, more than almost anything else, is listen. And don't listen in order to be able to formulate a comeback, but listen to what they have to say and then respond with as much love and patience and kindness as you can formulate. And if you can't, if they're gonna, if they're just kind of kicking your butt all over the porch, maybe you just need to say, not today, maybe another day, but not today, and let it go, because you don't want it to be a horrible experience for them either, because then they're just going to let it go and they're going to say, oh, this is a terrible thing, I can't ever vote for this. But let them understand that as people who believe in the right to abortion, that believe in reproductive justice, so that people who are poor and people who are at the very edge of their existence can still move forward because you believe they can. When I was reading, and it's during the United Church of Christ has always supported this the abortion and reproductive justice. And when the Hyde Amendment was passed, they voted against that. They've always said, with as much of love as they can, this is wrong. This is not what we are supposed to be about as human beings, as creations of God. And if you don't think you're a creation of God, that doesn't matter. Go ahead and do it anyway. You don't have to be someone who is, wearing a cross around your neck when you go knock on somebody's door. And that, let them know, I understand. I hear what you're saying. And if they want to hear you, they will. And if they don't, they don't.
I think one of the things that's important about this case is that, in addition to Jen, right, we have 13 other folks from a variety of different faith traditions who were litigants in this case. And there's a misconception that people of faith are opposed to reproductive rights. Obviously, there are some who are, but there are a great many different people of faith and faith traditions that support these rights and are standing with us. And I think this case has really allowed us to share your stories, win or lose in court. And I think that that's very important. And so thank you for everything that you have done as part of this. One other point I wanted to make about what sort of I think resonates with people is talking to folks about the fact that the government shouldn't be in the doctor's office with them. That these private, personal medical decisions, whether it's reproductive care or some other, types of decisions, should be made by the patients and their doctors, not by the government. And that is something that we have found really resonates with a lot of people with different, political and religious views.
I mean, how many of us want to have old white guys standing with us, in an obstetrician or a gynecologist's office? I mean, you really don't. It was interesting, and maybe, Jenny, I read it wrong, but it seemed to me when I was reading the judge's response from the last time, he said part of his issue was that none of us, except for one, would have been able to be pregnant and have a child, implying we were all too old and or male, and so that none of us could have children, and therefore we had no say so in this. And it really knocked me back. I thought, I can't believe I'm reading this. Maybe you could tell me whether I'm right or wrong in my interpretation.
Do you want me to? So there were
Sure.
two different theories of what they call standing, which is basically like the reason you get to be in court.
Right.
One of those theories was that you're all Missouri taxpayers, and that the state was spending money on enforcing this unconstitutional law. The other separate theory was that we had one person who actually could have become pregnant and needed an abortion in Missouri. We were actually advancing both of those theories and are still advancing both of those theories in your case. But in order to have the theory this plaintiff could have become pregnant and needed an abortion, we did need to say that she was of reproductive age, and in possession of a uterus.
Right.
So that is kind of the background there. But I know you want to open up to questions, so.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's just the legal mumbo jumbo that we have to put up with day to day.
Well, when you all asked us, did we want to do this? And the first question you asked was, are you a taxpayer? And I'm like, well, what the hell? Yeah, I'm a taxpayer. What do you think? And I had no idea that that was the reason you were asking that question. But when I say that to people, they go, what do they care? I said, well, it's way more important than you realize.
If anyone has a question, would you come off mute now and ask your question or put it in the chat? While we're waiting for that, I do just want to highlight Amy Weintraub's comment. Our next 3 canvases being held in this greater St. Petersburg area community are being hosted by faith communities, by Temple Bethel, Lakewood United Church of Christ, and Allendale United Methodist. So I think that that's really impressive. It speaks not just, you know, to the faiths, but to this community that we have here in St. Pete. I'm really proud to be a part of it. And to have these organizations and faith supporting us. So anyone with a question, speak now. Lots of I'm getting some direct thank yous to our panelists. They're coming directly to me, but I want you to know they're coming. So Janice, do you have a question?
Do you have any idea when the Missouri Supreme Court will review the case?
So we don't actually have a briefing schedule yet. So it's not clear when exactly they will review it. But in the coming months, we'll have a better sense of, you know, what they're thinking and when this will all get decided.
I think we do know that because of the time that appeals take, this will not get reviewed until after November election occurs.
And what about the ballot initiative that they are doing in Missouri? What are their criteria in that state, and what would the timeline be for that?
Jan, do you want to speak to that as the Missourian?
Truthfully, I do not know a whole lot about that. I have not even seen it very often, and I don't know why that is. I mean, I know that it exists and it will be on the ballot as far as I know. It has been approved for that, but they have tried very hard to make it not the case. It's a very slow process, and they have kept it to be. The last hearing that we had on Blackman versus Missouri, the judge said, oh, I will come back with a decision in 3 or 4 weeks, which would have made it January. And Jenny, when was it that he came back? It was months later with his decision to, you know, not support it.
It was late June or early July.
Yeah,
so.
right.
Yeah, and
So
we had
it's
argued that in November.
real turtle process. I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I was going to say, so we had the argument in November.
Right.
And then we got the decision in, I believe it was late June. But our case, just to be clear, our case is not connected to the ballot initiative. We challenged the Missouri current ban under the Missouri Constitution. The ballot initiative is a local organization that collected signatures to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment that would, in effect, overturn the ban because it would create reproductive rights in the state constitution itself. Jan is right. There have been multiple attempts by various state officials to interfere with the process of putting this on the ballot and to try to block it in the courts. Those efforts were unsuccessful. There were actually multiple court cases about this. And so the initiative is going to be appearing on the ballot in Missouri in November.
Right.
But we are not, Jenny and I are not working on the ballot initiative.
All right, everyone. If there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up and let all of our, I'm assuming mostly Floridians on here, jump out and get prepped. I hope that everyone stays safe and dry, away from the storm surge. You know, they say hide from the wind and run from the water. So if you're in Zone A in Pinellas County or you're in a mobile home, you have a mandatory evac, and I hope that you have evacuated or you have a plan. We want everyone, we want everyone here on these efforts, but we can't have you here if you're underwater. So, sign up for a canvas and then get out of Dodge if you need to, if you've been told to. Stay safe, stay dry, make sure you have lots of water, fill your bathtubs up tonight, crank the AC down in case you lose power tomorrow. Put a penny on the top of the water in your ice trays to see if your freezer goes out while you're gone. All the little tips and tricks that we know down here if you've been through a storm before.
I was
So
gonna say I'm learning a lot from this litany here. So
I'm just listing off, the 30 seconds or less prep. We could go into more detail, but yeah. All right, everyone. We really appreciate you panelists for being here. Jan, thank you for being a plaintiff in this case. As you know, if you weren't familiar with the litigation process thoroughly before this, welcome to that party. It is slow going but it can be rewarding in the end. So thank you. Thank you both for being part of it on the slow side and making sure it happens. And we'll all be watching for you and cheering for you in the background.
well, thanks
And
for
us
having
for you.
us.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes on 4, everyone. Let's get out. This is the last few weeks here. We've got this. Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.